Today our topic of discussion is factors in R. Now the question is, what is this factor? So in one word, factor in R is a data structure which is used for specific fields, means which take only predefined finite number of values. This is the important point you have to remember. That is, this factor data structure is used to define, or it will consider only predefined finite number of values. Now I have to explain this concept in more details. But here you have to understand one important note about this factor. That is, these are the variables which will take limited number of values. This is the most important point you have to remember. Now, to start with the concept of factors, first I will tell you what are the related attributes we have in case of factors. So, what are different attributes we can have? So, you will find first attribute, say x. So, this is one of the input vector which is to be transformed into the factor. So the first point, factor data structure can consider input vector which will be converted further into the factor. So this is the first input x, which is actually a vector which can be transformed later into a factor. Now there are second attribute in case of defining a factor, that is levels. So what is this levels? Again, levels is also an input vector that represents a set of unique values. So you have to remember this point. Whenever I mention the term levels, then you have to understand that I am talking about some unique values, and those values are definitely vectors. Right? So levels, it is an input vector that represents a set of unique values which are taken by this x. This is the second attribute for a factor. Now we have the third attribute, that is known as labels. Now what is this labels? Labels means it is again a vector, but it is a character vector which corresponds to the number of labels. Now I will explain this in more details. Now we have the fourth attribute, which is known as exclude attribute. So what is this exclude attribute? It is used to specify the value which we want to be excluded. Say if we have a set of values into these factors, then if we want to exclude some specific value or some specific word, then at this point of time we have to use this exclude attribute. Right? So this is the fourth attribute. And then we have another attribute, ordered. See the spelling, it is not order, it is ordered. So it is a logical attribute which determines if the levels are ordered or not. So whatever levels means the unique values or the unique vectors that we have considered, this order will check. It is just a logical attribute that the levels are ordered or not. Now we have the last attribute, which is known as nmax attribute. This attribute is specifically used to found the upper bound of the maximum number of level. So I have already explained that factor will take the predefined finite number of values. So whenever I am talking about a finite number of values, it is mandatory that we should have some specific attribute that can specify the upper bound of the maximum number of level. So these are the attributes that we have to consider in case of using factors. So it means by using these attributes, we can serve separate purpose. Now, first thing we have to understand how to create a factor. Now, first we will concentrate on factor creation. See, in R, it is quite simple to create a factor. Means this factor creation will be performed in two steps. The first step is we have to create a vector, because I have already defined that whenever you are creating a factor, then the first attribute associated with this factor is x. X is an input vector which is transformed into a factor later. So, for creating a factor, the first thing you have to create a vector. And now the second step is we have to convert or transform this vector into a factor. So these are the two steps which are associated with a factor. Now, how we could use R function means which R function is suitable for creating a factor. R provides a function which is known as factor function. This function is used to convert the vector into the factor. So whenever the question is asked to you how to create a factor, do not mention that factor function is used to create a factor. Here, factor function is used to convert a vector into a factor. So this point you have to keep in mind. So now let's talk about the factor syntax. First, we have to define one specific variable in which we will assign the converted factor. And for that purpose, we will use the factor function. And what should be the argument of this factor function? The argument of this factor function will be definitely a vector, because vector will be transformed into a factor. Now let's see how we can create a factor. So again, this is the left top is the place or the interface where you can write your code. So how to create a factor? So in this case, what we can do, we can take a simple variable. In this variable, I have to call a factor function. But pay attention to this. I cannot use this factor function directly because factor function works on vector. So first we have to create a vector, and in the previous class I have clearly mentioned that for creating vector we need another function which is known as C function, in which we will write the vector values like this, right? So first step is we have to create the vector using C function or combine function. But there is another misconception. If the question is asked to you how to create a vector, do not mention that using C function you can create the vector. No. C function is basically used to combine the elements of a vector, not creating a vector. So whenever you are combining the elements of a vector, then only you can achieve a vector. So now we will create one factor using these two steps. The first step is creating a vector. So we cannot create the factor directly, so we will create the vector. So now for creating vector, we need combine function or C function, and say here we will write something. Say ABC, this is the first element of the vector. Then I can write say XYZ or XYX. So the first step is done. So after creating the vector, we will execute this code. See, in the right top side, this D variable is holding 1:4, means it is having one row and four column. So the vector is created. So how to display this vector? If I write the variable name, that is D only, and execute it, we will be able to see the output of the vector D. See here. Now, after creating the vector, this is just a first step of factor creation. Now we are going to create a factor. Now, how to create a factor? So this is the main thing. So for that purpose, we know that we have to use a factor function. That is what we will do. I will take another variable, and within that variable, I have to use the factor function. And as I have stated that inside the factor function, the parameter will be one vector. So D is the variable which is holding the vectors. So what I will do, I will just use this D variable as a parameter of the factor function. So then see, in the right top we have the X variable, that is a factor is created using the factor function. And here if you print X, we will be able to see the factors. And whenever you are visualizing the output, see, it is showing that levels of a factor. So what is this levels is all about? It is one of the attribute that I have mentioned over here. So levels displays what? It displays unique values of a specific factor. So now if you see the code in this factor X, we have 4 unique values. So at this point of time, it is showing that levels AA, ABC, HH and XYX all are the unique values. So this is the first step how we can create a factor. Now there is one important point we have to understand. After this, we have to understand the next point, that is how to access components of a factor. See, like vectors, we can access components of a factors. How we can access components of a vector, we have discussed in the previous class. So the process of accessing the components of factor is much more similar with a vector. So we can access the element with the help of the indexing method. So in the previous class, you have explained that what is this indexing is all about. So here I want to state the first point, that is, with the help of indexing method or logical vector, we can access the elements of the factor, as the mechanism of accessing the components of a factor is similar with the vector. So we know that whenever a factor is created, now for accessing element, we have to mention the index of a specific factor. So how we can write it? Say our factor variable name is x. Means this x is a variable which is holding the factor elements. Now if I write, say, print and then the factor variable name, and then if I put some indices like this, then I will be able to see the specific component or specific element of a factor. So this is one thing. Or else what we can do, we can write print then the factor variable name, and then here we can write some value, say 2 comma 3. It means the second and the third element we want to access. Now how we can incorporate this concept? So now what we are going to learn? We are going to learn accessing components of a factor. Right? So now how we can access? So this is our factor, and now if I write x and then if I write say 2 and say I want to print this value, so I'm just writing print and then this one. Let's check this syntax will work or not. So here I'm using some concept of indexing. So here it is showing x y, x. See, x, y, x means which one? This value. So it is 2. So from this you have to be very clear about the concept that the index of R will start from 1. So the first index value is ABC and the second index value is XYX. So whenever I am printing this one, I will get XYX. This is one mechanism. Or else what I can do, I can also use this syntax like 2, comma 3. So at this point of time, see what is the output. In this case, say it is showing that incorrect number of dimension. So here, why it is showing incorrect number of dimension? So here, there is a biggest point you have to remember. Whenever I am discussing how we can access the component of a factor, the main thing you have to understand, the accessing components is similar with the vector. And also you have to remember one more point. First we have to create the vector, and whenever the vector is passed with the factor function, then only we can create the factor. So here the most important point is whenever you want to access component with this syntax, you have to use the combine function. So whenever you have more than one indices at this point of time, you have to use combine function. So the syntax will look like print, then the variable of the factor, and then you have to write one third bracket. Here you have to write the combine function, and you know that since combine is a function, you have to use round bracket, and then only you can put the indices. So here my point is accessing more than one indices at a time, you need to use combine function along with the name of the factor variable. So this is the basic structure. So what I will do here, I will use one combine function, and whenever I am using combine function, so I have to use round bracket. And here also I will use one round bracket, and this is closing of square bracket, and one round bracket closing is for printf. So this is how syntax will look like. So let me execute this code. See, now it is showing. What it is showing, I want to access component of index number 2 and component of index number 3. So these are the two mechanisms you can use. But this syntax is very much efficient because at a time you can access more than one index values. Now we have to move on to the third part. Now we will learn modification of factor. Now what is this modification? See, like a data frame, I was talking about data frame in the previous class. Whenever we have some CSV file, for an example, so this is my input file and it is saved in the format of .csv. And how we can store this file, we will use one specific variable and then we just write read.csv, and then we will write the name of the CSV file. So at that point of time, this variable D is holding this input. So it is a data frame. So D is a data frame which is holding a CSV file. Anyways, I will talk about it later on. So like a data frame, R also allows us to modify a factor. So in this case, it is very clear that whenever we are reading some CSV file, then in the later steps, we have to modify it. We will perform some activity on this CSV file. So definitely we can say that a data frame can be modified. So similarly, we have the provision in R to modify the factors. So in R, we cannot choose values outside of its predefined levels. Means we cannot insert value if its level is not present on it. So this is the first point you have to remember. So for this purpose, we have to create a level of that value. and then we can add it to our factor. So now we have to understand what is the importance of that attribute level that I was talking about. And this level attribute has a significant contribution in this concept. So what we will do, whenever a specific factor is there, and then whenever we want to modify some factor, so the first modification that comes in our mind is adding some new value. So I'm adding some new value means I'm modifying the existing factor. So at that point of time, the most important thing you have to remember that we cannot do this kind of activity without creating a level for a specific value. So level creation will be the must thing when you are going to modify one factor. So how we can do or how we can create a level, this thing we have to learn. But I will work on this factor. So x is our factor, right? So I will work on this factor. So here we have to understand what I'm going to do. I want to modify or I want to add some values into the factor. Now how I can do it? So I cannot add it directly. So for that purpose we have to create the levels. So how we can create the level? So one thing I can do, I can write the keyword levels, and then within first bracket or within round bracket, I will write the factor name for which I want to create the level, that is x. And then what I can do, then I can use C function. So why I am using this C function? Because this C function will now help us to combine the leveled value into the factor. So within C function, I will just use this syntax. So this thing I want to combine. Where? This thing I want to combine into my factor. So it means the new value I'm going to insert into the factor. And for that purpose, we need C, combine function. Now, what value you want to insert? Just mention it. Say, I want to insert a new value into the factor, and the new value is, say, I'm just writing new, right? So this thing you have to keep in mind. The first point, modification in a factor is not possible without creating a level. So how to create a level? The first point is apply level keyword, and the term is not level, the term is levels. So apply this levels keyword onto the factor x, means the variable which is holding the actual factor. But you know that whenever you are inserting some elements into the factor, first condition is they must be a vector, and it is only possible whenever you are using C function. So this element is going to insert into the factor for the first time. It's a new value. So for that purpose, you have to use C function so that this value can be treated as vector and later on it can be combined into the factor. So this is how inserting a new value takes place in R. So now here how we can see this value. So this is how we are adding this value. So now what I will do, just check the syntax. So this is the variable in which we have all factors. Then if I write inside this variable, say I want to insert at the position of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At the fifth position, I want to insert this element, say new. So what I will write x of 5. At this position I want to insert. What value I want to insert? I want to insert the value new, right? So let me execute this code and then say I want to display the factor again in order to check whether it is modified or not. See here the new value, that is the new, it is inserted at the fifth position into the factor. So modification of factor is not so easy. See here. First misconception exists while creating a factor is whenever we are writing this line means the value is inserted. No. In this case, the first step is happening means the vector creation part is happening over here using C function, and then you have to explicitly mention at which position you want to insert this new element. So I have mentioned that I want to insert this element at the fifth position. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So at the fifth position, this new value is inserted. Why I am inserting this element at the fifth position means, can I replace this? Means say I want to replace this vector with this new element value. Is it possible? So rewriting this thing is possible or not? Let me check this one. So what I will do, say I want to add another new value. This is the first step. I have to create one level. Say the new element is this one. Say EL. I want to insert this one. So first I have to create the level. So I'm creating it. Now what will be the position of EL? Say I'm just writing x of 2. But in the second position we have x5x. So here I just want to put this element EL. Let me execute this one. See, there is no error. Now what I will do, I will again display the factor. See what will happen? See here what it is showing. So EL is positioned just next to the element new, right? But I have mentioned the position x2 means it must be inserted at the second position, but it is not happening. So what happens means at this point of time, whenever I'm going to replace a value onto some existing values, then this is the output. So it is clear that syntactically there is no error, first point. Second point, this EL, it has got the correct position, means it must be inserted after new because it is a new element. So it is inserted. So here from this syntax, we can easily state that replacing a particular element is possible, but rewriting a particular element into the factor is not possible. Now then there will be the next question, how we can replace. I will tell you. So just make a note over here. Don't try to rewrite the value. So anyways, let me check. So what is the current value of the factor? So this is the current value of the factor that we are having. AA, ABC, HH, XYX, new EL. So EL value is inserted properly. So it means dealing with factor is not so easy. So now in order to understand factor in more detail so that we could replace some value, we have to understand some more steps. That is, factors are also associated with data frames. So in the previous class, some of you have asked me how to access data frame in R. So concept of data frame, again it is a data structure. It's not so easy because we can define it with respect to vector, we can define it with respect to factor. Now we will learn factor in data frame. So what is this factor in data frame? So when we create a frame with a column of text data like this, R treats this text column as categorical data and creates a factor on it. So whenever this question is asked to you, why this concept of data frame comes with the concept of factor, then you have to understand one point, in which situation we are using it. Whenever we have a particular CSV file and say in the CSV file we have column 1, column 2, column 3 like this, then at this point of time, if we have some text data like this, in each and every column we are having some text kind of data. So at this point of time, R treats all these text columns as categorical data. And this is the point from which R will start creating factors. So R treats this text column as categorical data and creates a factor on it. So this is the situation when we need this concept. Now here the question is how we can create the data frame on a particular factor. So say this one. Now we are going to create data frame in factor. So I'm just creating one by one. So I'm just creating a fresh factor. How to create a factor? First, we have to create one vector. For creating a vector, I'm just taking one variable and I'm using combine function, and then within this combine function, say I'm just taking some numeric value like this. Say these are the numeric value that I'm having. So my vector is created. So let's execute this one. So this is first vector. Now what I can do, I'm just creating another vector. Let me work with more than one vector. And here say I'm taking another kind of value. So both are integer values. Okay, then I have one question. What will be the size of these two vectors? They will be same or they will be different? For the time being, I'm just taking same length. Then later on we will justify. So I'm taking two vectors. The length of these two vectors are same, right? Now I am taking another value. Now you will understand why I am working with more than one vector. Say I'm taking another value, say w1. Here I'm just taking the text values like this. So these are the vectors I'm having. Now vectors are created. So these are the vectors, definitely vectors for data frame. Now the first question is why I am using more than one variable or more than one vector. See, my point is, what is this data frame? Data frame means we should have more than one column. So basically age w and w1, you can say that it is just like columns in the CSV file. Say the first column represents height, the second column represents the weight, and the third column represents the gender. So whenever you are creating a vectors for a data frame, you should have more than one column. So that's why we have more than one column over here. This is the first point. So vectors are created for the data frame. Now the next part, that is how to create the data frame. So now we will run creating the data frame. So in this case, how to create the data frame? Say I am taking one variable, say data, and inside this variable I want to create the data frame. So what I will write, okay, I am not writing it as data, I'm just writing it as D. Otherwise you will get confused with the keyword. So in order to create the data frame, you have to write the variable name. Let me write it as D1. Okay, so D1 is the variable name in which I'm going to create the data frame. So now in order to create the data frame, just write the keyword data, and then you have to write dot frame. So data dot frame is used to create the data frame. Now for creating the data frame, inside this data dot frame you have to pass the arguments. So arguments will be the variable names which are responsible for holding the vectors. So here the variables are age, w and w1, right? So this is how we can create a data frame. So for creating a data frame, please make a note. We have to use data dot frame And then within this function data.frame, and within bracket we have to pass the arguments. The number of arguments will be same as the number of vectors present before creating the data frame. So now let me execute this one. See, it is showing error, that is W is not found. So I think I have made one mistake. I have to execute this code first. Let me execute this one. W is created. Now we have got W, and now we have got W1, and now we can create the data frame. See, data frame is created. So the reason of this error is I haven't executed this vector because this vector is not created basically. So this data frame is created. Now how we can see the data frame? So you just write the variable name D1, then you will be able to see the data frame. See, this is your data frame. You are getting 3 columns, H, W and W1, right? Your data frame is created. Now you can perform one testing, that is, say if the gender of the column is a factor or not, because we are dealing with factors. We are not talking about data frames. Now let's perform one test. What test we want to perform? That is, if the say column, say W1, which is holding the gender, is a factor or not. So how we can check this one? So for that purpose, I'm just writing. So you have to write is, I'm just checking is factor. So it is very easy to remember. So which attribute I am checking, is factor or not? So here you have to write two things. First, you have to write the data frame name, then dollar sign. This dollar sign is used to access a specific variable. You have to remember this point. Now, which variable you want to access? In this case, I want to access W1 variable, because W1 variable is responsible for holding the gender. And here my intention is I'm just going to check whatever values W1 is holding, is it a factor or not? So for that purpose, I'm just writing this line. See, it is showing true, means it is a factor. And also the next point is, say you can print the W1 column to see the levels also. Now we will learn how to see the levels of a specific column. Or any column you can see the level. So I will write print, and then I can write the data frame name, and then again dollar sign to access the specific variable, that is W1. See, it is showing level. See here showing it is that the level value is female or male. Now the question is, what do you mean by level? At the beginning of the class, I have clearly mentioned that level attribute is used to show the unique values. So in W1 column, you have this much values. So the unique values are male and female. So whenever you are using this syntax to see the levels, so here it is showing the unique values female and male. So this is the purpose of using level. And now you can also differentiate between data frame and vectors, and also you can differentiate between factors and vectors. So list of elements is known as vector, but in order to create a factor, we have to create the vector and then we can create the factor. So factor is basically a combination of vectors. So this is all about data frame and factors.